I was only 21 when I found myself in some serious debt. A bit of fun here and there at the casinos, and suddenly, I owed at least $30K to some dangerous men. I settled on a minimum wage gig at Jollibee's to pay it off, where on the very first day, they shoved a mascot costume onto me. They told me to go outside, attract customers, whatever that meant. At first, it wasn't so bad. Most people just ignored me as I waved like a moron at random strangers. None of the staff seemed to care either. The manager was mostly on his phone and would randomly yell in a fit of anger, raging like a 12-year-old Twitch streamer. The real trouble came when it was midday, the sun at its highest peak, and the stuffy costume became unbearable. I was about to take off inside when an arm grabbed mine. Despite how thick the costume was, the grip was iron strong, hurting through all the layers. It was a guy in nothing but a pair of scuffed jeans, topless and muscled. Behind him was a crew of 4 other likewise dressed thugs, all holding weapons like bottles and machetes. A policeman walked by, took a glance and strolled away. We were in Kugman, one of the less fortunate areas in the city, and all around, nobody stepped in to help.
Hey, have you seen this guy?
The thug asked, brandishing in one hand a picture of me at a casino.
What time does he get off?
I gulped. The debt was due. I quickly thought of something.
He's inside.
My voice was shaky, but luckily through the costume, I didn't think he noticed.
He gets off at midnight.
The guy took one look inside the busy restaurant and shook his head. Letting go, he signaled to his gang and took up a spot across the street in clear view of the restaurant. For the next few hours, I agonized under the suit, praying they would leave. My actual end of shift came along at 4 p.m., yet I stayed. At 5, the manager came out and demanded to know what I was doing. I said I wanted to work some overtime, but he demanded I remove the costume and leave. The commotion attracted the interest of the gang, who watched warily. The manager waited for a response, staring. When I gave none, he spat on the floor, muttering words under his breath, and returned to the restaurant. I followed, not soon after. In the changing room, I removed the suit, glad to be free of it. But I knew the only way out was through the front entrance. The back was always locked, only opened when it was time to close the restaurant. So I stayed, waiting and waiting. I didn't dare to check if the gang were still there. They surely were. It was eventually 11:30 p.m., minutes away from closing time. Looking into the restaurant, most of the staff were gone, but the manager stayed, his back turned to me. Outside, it was pitch black. I caught a glance at just what the manager was doing on his phone. Gambling, the same addiction, the same vice, the same sin that had led me to this situation. Now I knew why he was so angry. He was losing outstanding amounts of money. I knew I couldn't stay forever, so I made my choice. Putting on the mascot uniform again, I left, the manager too engrossed in his phone to realize. Stepping outside, I began to pace faster and faster. I was so close to leaving when the same tight grip. Smiling gap-toothed, the thug raised a machete to my neck. It was over.
He leaves at 12, right?
What? I said stupidly.
He leaves at 12, yes or no?
Yes.
I replied in terror. He let go, and with that, I frantically made my way home. The next day, the manager had been found dead, repeatedly stabbed. Naturally, the workplace was closed, so I stayed home, staring up at the ceiling, wondering just how close to death I was, myself. I realized that, if it weren't for the suit, that would have been me. But he was in debt too. It would have been his time eventually. I just took a gamble and won this time. But for how long, I was uncertain.
When the news arrived that we were going to receive more staff members, most of us were happy. It would make life easier at Jollibee. Personally, I was relieved, but to my surprise, there were also those who were afraid. When I asked them, they'd spin me tales of who these new arrivals were, about cannibal practitioners and organ harvesters. It was true that most of these new staff were from a less reputable part of the city, Tonda. But their restaurant wasn't shut down because of voodoo or murder rituals. It was simply because of poor sales. The regional manager himself came down to say so. Even so, these new guys were certainly different from us. Skinny and pale, they looked ill and impoverished. The biggest among them looked more like a pencil than a person. But they were surprisingly polite and good at what they did. Quick hands and quick minds, they processed orders, cooked food, prepared drinks just as fast. If not, faster than us. We wondered why that was, if their sales were supposedly low. But in the busy workplace, such thoughts disappeared quickly as the next customer and the next came flowing through. I had the opportunity to talk to one of the new staff. She was slim, with shoulder-length hair. She seemed so delicate, even a touch would shatter her. Under the tired eyes, though, she was unmistakably beautiful, which to my embarrassment was why I approached her in the first place. "Hey, you look exhausted." In response, she gave me a glare, but it softened quickly.
I am.
She nodded in agreement.
To tell you the truth, it was easier at our old place.
Why was that?
Well, for one thing, your meat isn't fresh. It's much easier to cook fresh meat than chilled.
What do you mean?
Don't worry, you wouldn't understand.
And with that, she turned and left, leaving me bewildered. I made it my goal to get to know her and figure out just what she meant. Over the next month, my attempts were not in vain. The occasional chat between work, catching up at break, or workplace arrangements. Her name was Angelica, surprisingly a few years older than me, and had worked at Jollibee's since leaving school. I would catch her looking at me from the corner of my eye whenever we were working and considered it a good sign. Another month, some of the new staff were promoted to managers, a gesture of goodwill, I guess. Angelica was among them, and she used her position from then on to tease me whenever she could. She had opened up a lot now, smiling and laughing freely. Whenever she did, her old colleagues would flash me death stares, and I basked in their jealousy, knowing I had accomplished what they could not. There were changes to the workplace as well. For one, customers seemed to be pouring in a lot quicker now, and our usually slow meat fryers were chucking out patties and chicken at absurd rates. There was a room we never used that was now converted into a freezer, and regularly, staff would enter and leave it with heaving sacks, though about 90% of the time, this job was given to the Tonda staff, including Angelica, who would regularly disappear to the back for long periods of time. One day, I was put out back to clean up the dumpsters and bins that were usually overflowing. The stench was absolutely unbearable. Scrubbing the grease from age-old containers and stashing bin bags away into a nearby crusher. Whilst carrying a bag, the bottom split and the trash sloshed out onto the floor. Sighing, I got down to cleaning it up when something sharp caught my hand. Inspecting the object, I frowned. It was a jagged tooth, not human. I assumed nothing of it, throwing it into the crusher as well and continuing with my work. The next day, I was put in the same place, to my disappointment. It meant I saw very little of Angelica. But it was alright, considering how bad I smelt. Regardless, I set to work straight away. There were no jagged teeth this time, but the work was hard nonetheless. The beeping of a lorry reversing indicated the day's stock coming in, and I took a break to watch it. I was taken aback when I saw Angelica, hands on hips. She was berating the driver, but it was too far to hear. Something about lateness. He got round to unloading immediately, cardboard boxes that were dripping. Angelica watching all the while. Suddenly, she whipped her head around, and I ducked. She saw me though, I could tell. When I looked over again, she was nowhere to be seen. The driver was closing up the back, his delivery complete. I was put back into the kitchen the following day, but Angelica was suddenly much colder. She put me to harder tasks, without the hint of a smile. When she went out to the back door as expected, I followed her. Unnoticed, I slipped behind one of the dumpsters. The lorry came in, right on schedule. This time, I could hear their conversation clearly.
That's better. Can't let the meat get spoiled.
The truck driver grunted in response and got to work.
I think someone saw us yesterday.
You want me to take care of him?
No, I've got it covered.
And with that, she went back into the kitchen. I looked at the driver. His pants were soiled, dried blood encrusting his boots. His Jollibee's hat was patchy and unshaven. He looked disgusting. The moment he carried off his first load, I hurried over, probing the rest of the boxes. The smell was sweet, sickeningly so. I punched open a random one and looked inside. Stuffed to the brim were various dead animals. Rabbits, rats, dogs, cats. Whatever, all mashed together, almost unrecognizable from one another. I opened another box, the same thing. Even a damn lizard thrown into the mix. Suddenly, I felt something press up against my back. A knife.
Well, look who it is. Don't they say that curiosity kills the cat?
It was the truck driver.
You guys are sick. Is this what we've been feeding people?
Grabbing me roughly, he guided me back into the restaurant. A few staff members walked past and grinned. They were all the Tonda staff. I was led to the freezer room.
Open it now.
I did, and did everything in my power not to hurl. A skin monkey looked back at me, dead and lifeless, swinging from a hook in the ceiling. More lined the walls, and I was stuck counting when a loud bang returned me to my senses. Angelica, in an apron, a cleaver in one hand, a chopping board in front of her. Cutting apart a squirrel into chicken breast-like portions. Noticing my expression, she smiled an evil smile.
Fresh meat. I told you it was better.
I said nothing, and she raised the cleaver towards me.
Not a word, otherwise.
You wouldn't dare. Her face seemed almost regretful.
I never want to see you in this city again, unless you want to end up like the rest of our furry friends.
But what if he tells?
He won't. Now, get the hell out of here.
And with that, I was spun around and thrown out of the freezer. When I returned to the kitchen, the same staff from earlier seemed surprised to see me, but said nothing. I noticed sullenly how none of my original colleagues were there. The place was filled with Tonda people, and I was alone.